All right, so we're going to go ahead and build these pagination elements. There were no questions. And let's get things going. So I'm going to drop the link for all of you guys in the Zoom chat. If you guys do not currently have this project on your machine, then you can go ahead and run git clone with this URL wherever on your machine you would like to put it. You can put it on your desktop. That's where I think I have mine, or anywhere else. And I am going to swap back here. So normally we would be on our master branch, which is what I've named the main branch here. And once we're on the main branch, we can run git branch, and let's call this pagination. Some descriptive branch name of the feature we're creating. All right, so I'm gonna move this chat a little bit out of the way here. And we can go ahead and close this console for a second. Okay, so just to familiarize yourself again with everything that's on here, we have our app.js, which has our cart provider, which is related to the context, and then has our listings page, which is the page where all of our different products are listed in a row. And if we go in here, right now, this is fine. It's a pretty simple layout where we just have a search bar at the top, and then we take all of our products based on whatever is currently being searched, and we render them as product listing objects. This is going to get a lot more complicated pretty quickly. And I think one thing that is worth noting here is eventually when we have multiple pages for this project, we would probably like to have products listed in a lot of different pages. Maybe there's a home page where it suggests a couple of products for you. And there's a separate page for searching for things and separate pages maybe for looking at specific categories. And so we might want to reuse this product listing logic multiple times, especially once we add pagination to the table. We probably don't want to go ahead and write that logic over and over because it's going to get pretty gross pretty quick. So what I'm going to do to start us off here is I'm going to move this product stuff here into a separate component. And let's call this product table. And we can create our function, product table. We won't pass in any properties yet. Let's return a temporary element just to remind ourselves that we need something. And then don't forget to export it, or else you will be confused later why you can't import. I do this all the time. All right, so we have our product table here. And let's do one other thing. Let's take this element here, so our filtered products.map, and let's put this into our product table and replace this temporary element. I'm going to create a fragment on the outside since we're going to eventually put more stuff in here. And filtered products does not exist. Product listing does also not exist. So we need to pass in our product data here. This table should be reusable for any kind of products. We should be able to just pass in a list of everything that should be shown, and it'll go ahead and show it in the table for us. So let's add a property up here. I'm going to put it not as just a named object and then do like props.data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to automatically destructure it. And we're going to pass in a property that's just going to be called product data. And let's replace this filtered products with product data. And then our product listing here, we can go ahead and import this from the correct page. And now that we've replaced it, we can go back into our listings page and we can just put a product table. And make sure we pass in our product data, which is our filtered products. And again, filtered products is just all the things that are showing after we've searched for something, and it filters down the result. This is what we did in the very first week. We wrote a little frequency array algorithm, and there's a couple of other filtering criteria here. Okay, I'm gonna pause for about 30 seconds. And if there's anything that you guys haven't caught up on, go ahead. This is going to
Sorry,
be, go ahead.
I have a question. So, are we supposed to be like typing like how does this normally work? So, like, we're gonna be doing this while you're
You can
also
do whatever
doing
you want.
this?
If you would like to follow along, you're welcome to. The goal here
Okay.
is to sort of make it interactive. So I'll stop a little bit and sort of ask questions where I think there's a key understanding. But if you do want to follow along and work on this and modify it yourself, you're welcome to.
Okay, thank you.
Totally your own decision. And again, if there's any questions that come up about why something is happening, or if you need me to go back to another file, and in that file, there's something that you're behind on, you need to catch up on, just go ahead and unmute. I'm not super great about noticing chat messages, so just yell. Okay, so we have this and we have our product table. So let's go ahead and add in a couple of other elements that we're going to need. So we have all of our products here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another section at the bottom, which is where all of our pagination elements are going to go. And we're going to create one section on the left, which is going to be let's make this a label element. And this will be products per page, followed by space. And then let's create a I forget exactly what the correct element is. Sorry, give me 1 second. Just want to double check and make sure I'm doing the right thing. So we're in product table. And what we want is a select element. Great. No worries. So product table is something that we just created. We created a separate file and we took this little piece of code here, which was in our listings page in the HTML. And then we pulled it into our product table and made it a separate thing. And we pass in our filtered products, which is everything that we want to show into our product data. All right, so we're going to here create a switch. And we're going to name this our pagination size switch. And we're going to give it a couple of options. So the options in a switch are what appears when you open it. This is a drop-down menu. And the value of these options is when we click on that thing, what is it going to pass back to our switch so that we can actually identify what's being clicked inside of our code. So let's create a couple of options here. These options are going to be how many things we're showing per page. Let's do one maybe of 10 items for if people have a really small screen. We can say that this is the number 10. And let's do one for 20 items. And let's do one for 50 items for people who have a really big screen and where they want to see a lot of things at once. All right, so one other thing that we're going to need in here at some point is when we click on that switch, we need to respond to that event. Does anyone have any idea what the event we probably want to listen for here would be?
On click.
It's actually going to be on change. This is very similar to an input, but you would think that it would be on click. I wonder if that actually exists. Oh, it probably does exist, but I think this is probably just clicking on the switch itself. So we're going to do on change here. And this on change is when we select a new item to go into that switch. What is it going to show? And we need to create a function of something it's going to do. And let's leave this empty for now. I guess we can't do that. We'll go ahead and put a little function in here. And then we'll just leave it as a to-do item. I don't know why this is a weird color. All right, we're going to come back to this a little bit. We're just going to put all of our HTML elements together here, and then we'll make some changes. And let's put another section down below this. Let's help ourselves out and sort of label this. This is our pagination size controls. And then this is going to be our page number controls. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to add a bunch of different buttons. So the inspiration that I'm taking here, if I go to Amazon, and let's go to back to school items. This is not what I want. Let's search for something here. Water bottle. So on Amazon, if I scroll down to the bottom, they have a sort of page selector down here where there's a button to go to the next page and to go to the previous page. And they also have buttons where we can go to the very next page by clicking on that page number. And then they also have sort of 3 dots here and then the very last page. And I think that last page is really helpful because it shows you how many pages there are, and you can go automatically to the end if you want. So we're going to try and implement that as well. Okay, so what I'm getting from that is we need a lot of buttons. So we're going to call this one previous. We'll just call it previous. And that's exactly what we're going to put in the button text. Let's copy this a bunch of times. And we're going to need a couple of things here. I'm indecisive. Let's put one at the end, and this is going to be our next page button. And then let's do our current page. And this is to do for a second. So we don't currently have a way of showing what the current page is. And let's do a couple of other things here. So one thing that I'm noticing is this pagination will show the very next page number only if it exists. So if I go back to 1 here, there is no way to go to the 0th page, and so it doesn't show any numbers to the left. But it will show at least one number in any direction that's available. And then if there's multiple pages to get to the end, then it'll give us our 3 dots and it'll give us our last page. So let's add some conditional rendering here. So we want only show, I'm going to hit control question mark, and that puts a comment in here. Only show previous number if that page exists. And let's do the same thing here. Only show next number if that page exists. And we'll start with this, and then we'll do some more complicated stuff later. So let's say, for example, that our page number is 2, and our max number of pages is 7. We need some piece of logic in here to check whether there is a page before the current page. So let's pretend we have a variable called the current page. What is the logical condition we would want to put in here to check and make sure that this is at least the second page or later, meaning there is a page previous? We can do current page is greater than or equal to 2 pretty easily. And in that case, we're going to conditionally render another button here. And let's call this one 1 previous. And this will also be to do because we don't currently have that current page variable. And let's say that we have a current page variable and a max page variable. How are we going to determine if there's a page beyond the current page? What will be a good condition for that one?
It's -1 from the last
Yeah.
page.
So current page is less than or equal to max page -1. Or less, strictly less. Because if it's, no, if max page is number 7, then we only want to show the next page if it exists. Okay, so it is going to be less than or equal to. So if this is 6 and this is 7, then we do want to show that 7 button. But if this is page 7 already, then we don't want to show it because that condition will be false. Okay, so you have a couple of things here. And this is going to be our basic controllers. So we have a drop-down switch and we have some other stuff here. I'm going to just create these as constant variables for a second. Equal to next page is equal to 7. And is that enough? No, max page is what we call it. And this gets rid of all of our errors. And so I'm going to run this really quick in our terminal. And let's look and see what it looks like in the browser. Okay, so we have our cart. We have 3 items. And this does not look very good. I guess I probably got the wrong item. Oh, it's a select, not a switch. Let's fix that really quick. Over here, we created a switch tag. That does not exist. So let's make it a select. Great, and now it shows our dropdown correctly. So this does not look great. I would personally like to have this on the left side of our page and then have these buttons on the right side and split them up. So we're going to do a very short sort of jump ahead to some CSS properties. And the property that we care about here, we're going to put into our pagination container. You don't have to name these if you don't want to, but I find that it helps me sort of figure out what each container is for. And also once you start styling things, it will be important to add class names. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some style. And we're going to do this by passing it a JavaScript object that has all the different properties that we care about inside of it. So the properties that we're going to pass here, just to make this look pretty, is we're going to set our width to be 100 view width, which means take up the full width of the screen. And we're going to set the display here, these flags. And you don't know what these mean yet, that's fine, don't worry about it. And we're going to set the justify content property to be space between. And let's look and see what this looks like. Great, so that fits our thing here. essentially what we're doing is we're saying this container, which has all of our items, we can actually go into our inspect element here and see our pagination container where we added those properties now has a width of the full view width. And flex means put them on the same line and sort of stretch them as needed to fill up a specific orientation. And then this justify content means put all the space of the whole container in between the two items. So make them as far apart as possible. You'll notice it goes off the screen a little bit, which is kind of gross. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to add a quick CSS file, .css, and we're just going to set the body tag to have margin 0. And then we need to import this. Let's make sure this worked. Great. Okay. So now it doesn't go off the page. This is another thing that you just kind of learn after doing this for a while. Cool. All right. So we have that, and let's get into some of the actual fun stuff. Do I need to pause really quick? Is anyone still catching up? Is there anything you need to see? This recording will be available as well. I'll be uploading it to YouTube by the end of the day tomorrow. So you can always come back and look at it again.
I just wanted to I missed exactly what you wanted to do for the bottom part now, or like what you're trying to achieve.
Mhm.
Maybe I missed it.
So what we're doing is by default, all of our HTML elements just stack on top of each other in a row, which kind of looks okay here for our products. But for our actual controls here, I kind of would like to have them separate. This is just personal preference. And so we added a couple of style properties to the element that holds those things. So this is all the stuff that's on the left, our pagination size controls. And this is all the stuff that's on the right, our page number controls. And so what I did is I added a style property to the container of both of those and added these 3 properties. Width means take up the whole width of the screen, and then display and justify content go together, which just puts them at separate ends. And they were going a little bit too far off the screen, which is why we created our little CSS file and the body element. We set the margin to be 0. By default, your browser puts a tiny little margin, which is just a little blank space around your page, which is okay. But if you set the entire width of the screen, it doesn't take into account that little tiny area. And so that can be kind of gross. Okay, again, yell if we need to slow down. I know this is really fast, but I just have a lot of ambition about trying to get through this. Okay, so now that we have our HTML elements in here, we need the actual pieces of state that we're going to use to control this grid. So right now, it just has all the products in here, but there's no smartness to it. And so there's really sort of a couple of different pieces of state that I think are related here that we're going to need. And I'm going to put these in a comment just so we can think through them together. So does anyone have any ideas for a piece of state that would be useful in order to control the page of our grid based on the things that we've just put in there? What kind of variables would we need? Any thoughts?
Current page.
Yes, we need a current page, which will just be a number, and it'll keep track of whatever page you're currently on. And we're going to set this to be default of 1, because there's always going to be a first page. What else do we need? I'll give you a hint. It's on line 5. We need a max page. We need a max page here, which just tells how far can we go based on however many products we have, and we'll need to calculate this. And there's one other thing that I think would be useful. Does anyone know what else that would be?
Is it that triple dot thing you were talking about? No.
The triple dots, um, so you mean these dots down here? This is something that I think we were going to try and add, but I don't think we're going to really have time to do that. We'll do it at the end if we do have time. But this is another case of conditional rendering where if there's space between the next page, which would be this, and the very last page, then we could render our 3 dots in our last page and have them skip ahead a lot. We're going to hold off on that and do it at the end if we have time. The other thing that would be useful is because we added our select here, we actually need some way of storing what the current value is, a piece of state for how many things are being shown per page. So let's call this page size. And this will also be a number. And let's default this to be 10. Cool. So these 3 pieces of state are very interrelated. We could put them as 3 different state variables with 3 different use state calls. But I can foresee an issue where we might come across an impossible state, where all these things are related to each other, but in a way where if we changed one of them and the other one hasn't updated yet, it would be very, very bad, would cause some problems. Does anyone sort of see where the impossible state might come in?
I guess like near the ends, the beginning or end of some sort, maybe.
Yes. Why? What 2 variables being related to each other could cause a problem if one of them changes but not the other? So page size doesn't really matter. It's not related to the other 2 directly.
It's is it like 0? Like,
The problem is current page and max page. So if our current page has to be within the bounds of 1 and max page, always. Like it doesn't make sense if it's 0. We're going to have a bunch of issues if it's 0. And it's also going to be a problem if it's greater than max page. And normally we could probably put in some logic to only change the current page when our max page allows, like going forwards or backwards. But if we were to search for new items, that's going to put a different number of items into our table here. So maybe we had 50 items and then we make another search and now we have 200 items. And so that gives us a much higher max page and our current page can go beyond. But the other way around is actually what's scary. If we search for something and there's less items than there were previously, and we updated max page because we recalculated, well, maybe there were 23 pages previously, but now there's only 10. And we were on the 22nd page, well, that's going to be really bad if we don't update our current page before React gets a hold of it. If we update max page by itself and React re-renders, then current page is going to be much greater. And we're probably going to have some sort of error in our JavaScript. It's going to be trying to grab an element that doesn't exist from our products. And so we need to make sure that they both update at the same time so that we don't get that impossible state. That kind of understand why this would arise. Any questions related to that impossible state? Okay, so when we see something like this happening, this is a really good indicator that we probably want to use a reducer instead of a bunch of separate use state calls. And a reducer puts all of our states into one variable, all the things that are related to each other. And we update it by dispatching actions. And those actions say, this specific thing happened on our site, and I'm going to pass you the data related to that thing happening. And then we provide a function where when we choose what action happened, we perform the logic that's important and update all the state that's related together. So we can change our max page, and we can make sure that our current page, if it's greater, we reset it. And that happens before React gets its hands on the updated page refresh. And that way, it will never try and render something that's invalid. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to take out this current page and max page, and let's add a reducer. So we're going to start this the same way we would a normal state hook, except we're going to call this pagination state. And we're going to call this pagination dispatcher. And we're going to call the useReducer hook and import that. I'm going to go over to the documentation just so that we can kind of talk through what this is. And I'll pass this link to you guys as well through the Zoom chat for anyone that wants to follow. The terminology here is that we dispatch an action, which is why that function that normally would be our setter for our state variable, we name something related to dispatching. And then this variable, instead of being one piece of state, is an object that has all of our state together that we care about. And the arguments that we give to this hook is a reducer function where it takes in the old version of the state and whatever action it just received, and it has all the logic to update our state, and it returns a new state object with all of the changes that we want. And we can also pass in an initial version of the state, which we will do. So this would be our initial version of the state. We put it at the top of our component like normal. And what we're going to do is we dispatch an action, which we're going to use as it does it kind of interesting here. Normally, the convention that I've seen is that it passes a property called action, and that action is a string that determines what needs to happen. And in this case, it does the same thing, but normally this is all uppercase. And then we can also pass in the actual data that we care about. So anything that needs to be updated, any new values, things like that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create our function here, and this is going to take our old state and our new action object. And this is a function. And then our second argument is our initial state object. And so we want to set default values for all of these things. Our current page, we're going to set it to start at 1. Our max page, we'll set it to be 1 as well. And we'll recalculate it once we actually get products into our grid. And then our page size, we're going to set this to be 10 by default. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a switch statement. And our switch statement takes a variable and allows us to create different cases of what the value is. And when those cases are found, it'll execute the code inside that case. So we're going to switch our action object dot type, which is what they suggest doing here. Our type is what action we're passing in, and we name it whatever we want. And then we actually perform the logic in here. So I'm thinking of different actions that we're probably going to want. One action that we might want would be when our search criteria changes and we get new data. So let's call this data change. And in this case, we want to do a couple of things before we return our new state object. We want to when our data changes, what's the first thing that we want to do? Again, we're changing these 3 things. some combination of them. If we have a different amount of products, what do we need to do first?
You need to change it to the current amount of product. Is that where you're trying to go at?
So this dispatcher is for updating these state variables based on some amount of data. And this specific action that I think we're going to need at some point will eventually get triggered when we get a new amount of product data in here. So it might be different products, it might be a different number of products, it might be a subset, could be anything. But when that changes, we need to change these variables. Which of these variables actually needs to change and which ones do we need to change first is the question. Is our page size going to count? Is that going to change? This is not
The
going to change.
the
This is just,
max page.
yes, max page is the thing that we need to do first. Our page size is not going to change because this is just a switch that we have at the bottom. It doesn't matter how many items we actually have in the thing. It just matters what the user wants. So this is going to go unchanged in this particular action. But first, we need to update our max page because we have a different number of items now. And so the number of pages is going to be different, most likely. So first, calculate new max page. And then we also want to reset our current page to be 1. So let's do that. Let's create a new max page. And we need to calculate using this variable, which is just an array of all of our products, how many pages we actually need to show. And I'm going to run through this because this is a little bit complicated and will probably take too long to think through as a group. But we have our old state where we have our page size. This is not changing, so we can use the value that currently is in that variable. This is how many items show per page. And we want to grab our product data.length and divide it by the page size. So how many products do we have? This could be, I don't know, if this is 70 and our page size is 10, then this is going to come out to be 7 even, which is great. We want 7 pages. However, this is going to come out to be a decimal because that's how division works by default. And so we need to do a math.ceiling. And what this does is it'll take whatever decimal you have and round it up to the next whole number. The reason why we're going up instead of down is because our max page, if we have, say, a page size of 10, but only one object, we still want it to have one page. We're doing one index here. If we rounded it down, then the max page would be 0, and that's a little bit weird. Actually, let's do it the other way around. I think that'll make more sense to people. So let's do this. So let's round it down, and we'll do our pages 0 index. So we have our new max page, and we're going to then return our new state object. So at the end of every state, of every part of your switch statements, we need to return our new state object with all of our changes. So we're going to, I think this needs to be indented. Is that why it's yelling at me? Default case. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to destructure first, which means take all the existing properties in our state variable and put them into this new object. And then we're going to overwrite the properties that we want to change. So we will set our max page property to be our new max page. And we're going to set our page size property to be 1. Sorry, not page size, current page. And again, the reason why we're doing this all together is because this current page needs to update every time max page does. It needs to update at the exact same time. So we're going to take our old state properties. This is going to spread out our page size. So page size will also be a part of this. And then we overwrite those other two properties. Okay, so this is one thing that we need. Another case that we're going to have is change page size. So when we hit that switch, we want to change our page size variable here. And we need to do a couple of things here as well. And eventually we're going to finish by returning a new object. Old state. So what do we need to do if we click that little switch in the bottom that changes the page size? We need to change the actual page size itself to be our new value. And then this is also going to change the number of pages we have again. So we're going to have to recalculate that. And because we're recalculating this, our current page also needs to get reset again to make sure that we don't have any impossible state. So step one, update page size, calculate new max page, and then reset current page. All right, so here's what we're going to do. One of the other things that we're going to pass into this action object is a payload. And our payload property is going to contain any data that we want to send to our reducer function. In this case, we need to actually send that new page size. So we're going to grab new page size to be our action object dot payload dot page size. And our new page size here, we need to recalculate that, but it's the same calculation. New max page. It doesn't like this. Do I have parentheses wrong or something? All right, we're gonna call this something else for now. New max page size. We're gonna update this calculation instead of being our old state page size to just be our new page size. And then we can go ahead and create our new state object. And we'll set our page size property, which we have down here, be our new page size. We're going to set our max page to be new max page size. And we're going to set our page, our current page to be 1 and reset it. All right, this looks pretty good to me. Let's think of some other actions that might be useful here. Another action that we're going to have at some point is the ability to click these buttons to go to the next page or go to a specific page. So we probably need to support that. So let's put an action down here. Change page. And let's get our new page number. And we'll also pass this in as part of the payload. New page, we'll call it new page. And then we need to return our new state object here. With our current page set to be our new page number. I like putting these variables out in front just because I think it's more descriptive of what we're passing into these returns rather than just passing in this payload object. But you can copy this and put it in here if you want to save a line. All right, this is a pretty basic, not super rigorous reducer function. Probably what we would want to do in this reducer if we had more time is do some error checking. So instead of having this just default case down here where if we get an action other than these, well, what the hell, we'll just do it anyway. We're going to create a new error, and let's call this invalid pagination reducer action. Action object dot type. And so what this will do is if we get down to this case, it'll throw an error in our console rather than just letting us get away with it. And another thing that I foresee could be an issue is when we change our page, we need to make sure that this new page is valid. And if not, throw an error. We could either do it here or we could do it somewhere further down. Let's do it here. So we want to check and make sure that our new page number is a valid page. So let's create an if condition here. What logic do we probably want to put in here to make sure that this page is valid? One condition would be that we want our new page number to be greater than or equal to 1. If we're trying to go previous and we're already on page 1, that should not be allowed. And similarly, if our new page number is greater than max page, then we also want to say, no, you can't do that. And if this is true, we're going to simply return our old state. We're not going to let it happen. Nothing is going to change. You'll remember maybe when we talked about state and objects and arrays that are in a state variable, React only re-renders when you call that updating function for your state variable if you pass it a completely new object or a completely new array. If you just change the array, React is not going to know that it needs to re-render, which is why when you have an array and you update the array, you have to do like old array plus your new item, and then pass that to your updater function. Similarly, if we just pass it the existing object, it's not going to re-render our page or do anything crazy. But when we get to the end of any of our reducer functions, we want to pass it a new object to make sure that React knows there are new values here and you do need to re-render the page accordingly. So we got that. I'm noticing here that I'm not being consistent in page indexing. So normally in programming, things start from a 0 index, right? The first index in your array is a 0. But when you create a user interface, most people aren't programmers, and seeing a page 0 is going to be kind of weird. And so in my head, when I reset, I always set to page 1 because I think that makes the most sense to me. But I said earlier that we were doing something as a 0 index, and that's going to be scary. So I think what I need to do here is I need to change this math.floor to be math.ceiling. And that way it's always going to round up when we calculate our number of pages to be create a whole extra page for if we have extra items. So maybe there's only 1 or 2 items in a page size of 6. It'll round up And so this will start us at index 1, and it'll go up to page 7. And I'm going to do that here and here. And so now our page number is greater than or equal to 1, which is valid because we can't have a page 0. And then our max page is going to be page 7. That's the furthest page that they can actually be on safely. And if our new page number is greater than that, if we try and go to page 8, then it's going to not change anything. Any questions about this reducer function? Why we did anything? Anything you see missing?
Is it possible to create a pagination without useReducer?
You could do this with just a couple of state variables if you want to, but the reason why we're using useReducer is because anytime that our page, like our page count changes, our max page, we don't want any render of our site to possibly exist where the current page is greater than that max page. And if we have them as separate variables, React doesn't guarantee the order in which it re-renders things, it updates states. It doesn't even guarantee that as soon as you call a state updater, that it's going to re-render your page. It might happen, several milliseconds in the future. And so if we do it in two separate state variables and we change them separately, there might exist a time where between the two updates, our max page is updated, but our current page hasn't. And React will try and render with that impossible state, and some JavaScript error will happen. We want to avoid that. So that's why we're doing it with useDispatch. You could possibly do it with state. You could do it with a state variable and just make it an object, like use state, and then pass it an object with a couple different properties. Like that's totally fine, and then it accomplishes the same thing. useReducer is just a little bit more explicit, and this is like the actual use case of why you would want it. That's what we're trying to display. Does
Got
someone
it.
else have a question?
Thank you so much, Eli.
Mhm. Any other questions or comments? It's 5 o'clock, so if you have to be out, by all means, you're welcome to head out. The recording of this will finish this up. I can't imagine it's going to take more than half an hour, but it might go until about 5:30 because we have a couple more things to do.
I just have a like random question. Like if you wanted to test something for this, like if you wanted to do some like function testing to make sure that um like it works so that if someone changes the code later, that it's like verified, would you apply something, some kind of test like that to like what would you do professionally in this
That's a
instance?
great question. So there's all kinds of different testing that you'll do in a computer science job. Depending on the actual kind of work that you're doing, there's different kind of tests. If you're writing something that's like a backend system, there's no user interface. And so what people will do is they'll write automated tests that just run different functions of your code and expect the right output. And there's also tests for if you have a UI where you can create a robot basically that opens a browser and clicks on certain things and expects the UI to look a certain way when those clicks are finished. I've written a couple of those. Um, Other things you can do is you can create a component testing suite where your um, your code creates individual React components and might call certain functions to update that component, not like as part of a whole page, but just that component on a browser. And then again, we'll look for a specific output or the component to behave a certain way. And so that's pretty much the best way to do this automatically. Um, Pretty much any job you'll have, you'll be creating some amount of tests. What you're describing, where you test something that you're currently implementing so that in the future, if someone makes a change, we can automatically determine if that broke a piece of code that was previously working, is called a regression test. In a regression test, we create when we first create the system, and after we make changes and we finish our other features, we run all those regression tests. And if they fail, then we know that something we changed had an impact on what that test is actually trying to test. And that's also very common.
If we wanted to just test it like on a really simple scale for like our kind of like simpler projects, what kind of thing do you think would be a good way to just kind of practice?
I think the best way is to just open it up in your browser and do all the things that a UI tester would do or a quality assurance tester. Like try as hard as you can to break it, give it some sort of impossible thing that it should be able to handle, and make sure that it actually can. So if you had like an input field and you were like signing up for a service and you wanted to test that sign up form, well, what if you signed up with the chat to be, or sorry, not the chat, I'm looking at the chat right now. What if you typed in a bunch of numbers for the name, or you typed in nothing and it's just an empty input? And try and give it all the different ways, all the different combinations of behaving, and make sure that it works how you expect. And that's where console log statements come in. If you can't, if you are finding something that you're not sure about, you can go ahead and print out whatever the current value is. But especially for something this small, the best thing you can do is to just do it yourself and try out all the different combinations of things. So for us, we can't actually do it right now, but maybe we try with all of our different page sizes and we go through all the different pages, click all the buttons, try and make sure our cart still works, even with our page sizes are, changing, make sure all the features work together. And the only way to do that is by hand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the useReducer that came from the book, there was an example of an impossible state, but it's a very small, very contrived example. And there's not really a whole lot of practice for it. So that's kind of the goal of what we're doing here, picking out an example where it actually shows up in real life and why we want to make that decision to use useReducer over useState. That's the whole point of this project and why we're doing it over several weeks and focusing on one specific feature. So we can look at, in a real product, where do these things show up? How do you recognize when they're useful? And then how can we actually work on them? So I'm glad that this seems to be at least a start in the right direction. Again, if you go through the recording and it still doesn't make sense, I'm always available. Just reach out. I'm easy to Slack. Great. Okay, let's do a couple more things here. We're almost done. We have our reducer here, which now has pretty much all of our logic. We haven't tested it yet. We'll do that at the end. But we need to actually hook up this reducer to everything else. So let's start with our first action, our data change. So we want, when our product data changes, to call our dispatcher and pass in this data change action. Does anyone have any idea what we would need to use to try and listen for when this product data changes? It's another kind of hook. That's your hint.
Use effect.
Exactly right. We need a use effect statement. So we're going to put this down here. Use effect, and then some sort of function that's going to run, and our dependency array. And what are we putting in the dependency array? We're putting in the thing that we're listening for a change, our product data. And when our product data changes, then we are going to call our pagination dispatcher, and we're going to pass in an object. And this object is going to have a type, and it's going to have any data that we want to pass in through the payload. That's what this is here. We need to give it a type, and the type is going to be data change. Got to put this in quotes. Oop. Oh my goodness. Data change. There we go. And this is all it's going to do. It's just going to identify to the dispatcher, we have new data. You need to update all of your different things in here. Let's look at our next thing, change page size. So this needs to be called, and it passes in a page size payload. And this change page size is going to be called from our select element here, which is where we're holding the number of products per page. So this onChange feature, this is an event, which means that it receives an event object with all the details about the event. And we're going to call our pagination dispatcher. Our type here is going to be change page size. And now we're going to pass in a payload property as well. This payload is going to be another object because we want to give it whatever amount of keys are useful for this particular action. And so we need to get our new page size that we changed to. This works kind of like an input element where we can do events.target.value, since we specified a value property here. And we said that our payload for this event is going to have a page size key. So change page size, we're going to pass it in the key page size. And we're going to give it the new value that was selected. This is not exactly going to work. Let's roll with it for now. No, let's not roll with this. This is something that you would come across eventually. I changed my mind again. We're going to pretend that this is totally fine, and then we'll try and find the error when it shows up. All right, so now we have our page number controls where we have a previous button and we show the previous page number, the current page number, and our next page number. So these variables previously didn't exist, but they do now, and they're part of our pagination state object. So we can get pagination state dot current page. And we can do that again where it says current page down here. And here where it says max page, we're going to get pagination state dot max page. So again, it's only going to show these buttons if it's supposed to. So if we're on page 2 or later, then it'll show the previous number. But if it's page 1, it won't show anything. Okay, so we've lost all of our errors. We haven't implemented these buttons yet, but I want to deal with this other problem first. So let's go ahead and just make sure this is running. I think it should still be running. Great, I'm going to restart it just in case. And this is going to open in our browser. Awesome, so no errors here. I'm going to open our console just to be sure. Awesome, so no errors. So we can go ahead and change our number of products per page. 10, 20, 50. Right now it's not doing anything because we only have 3 products. So showing 10 things doesn't even matter. I forgot to do this. So we need a lot of data kind of quickly. And what I'm going to do is something really disgusting for the sake of time. And we're going to copy these 3 items that we have here in our listings page at the top. And I'm just going to copy it over and over and over again, many, many times. This page is going to be comically long. All right, that seems like enough. 1,500 lines. All right, so this is gonna be a lot of products. And let's go back in here and see if we can figure this out. Ooh, two children with the same key, one. I forgot about this. So the problem is when we eventually render out all of our products, we use the key down here where we map them out. We need to give a key since we're using a map function. And this is the ID, but because we just copied it over and over again, these all have the same ID. So that's not gonna work. Let's do this instead. Let's go into our product table, and where this map function exists on line 59, we're gonna add a second variable inside this function, which is just the index that we currently are in this array. We're gonna give this as the key instead. Not pretty, but it'll work for now. Let's refresh our page. Oh no, what happened? I think my browser froze. Cool, so it's gone now. And right now, it's showing a lot of things. It's probably showing all of them together. So this pagination is not working. And we might wonder why. Reason number one is that we haven't actually taken this product data and cut it down. So we know how many things we want to show, but right now we're still just taking our whole product data array and showing everything together. So what we need to do is we need to throw in some math to create a new array that we're going to replace with our product data here. That's just a subset of our product data, however much is supposed to be showing. We're going to do this as a separate array. Let's call this current page products. And we're going to do this as a use memo. And use memo is a hook that we call with a dependency array. And it calculates a value only when that thing changes. So every other time this re-renders, it's not going to recalculate, but when the dependency array, whatever's in there changes, then it will re-render. And so we're gonna cut down our array here anytime that our pagination state changes. So when our new page changes, our current page, our max page, any of that changes, we want to recalculate what should currently be showing. So we need to grab a couple of things. We want to get our first item index, the first item that should be showing on the page, equal to something, and our last item index. So the math here that we're going to do is we're going to get our current page times page size. So if we're on page 1, it goes straight to 10, but we don't really want that. We're going to do current page minus 1. Because again, our current page is 1 indexed, which means it starts at 1, but our array is 0 indexed. And so on page 1, we still want to get the 0th element of the array. So we're going to do minus 1 here times page size. So again, if our page size is 10, and we're on the first page, this is going to be 0, 0 times 10 is 0, which means it's going to start from the 0th element. If we're on page 2, 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 times 10 is 10, so it's going to grab the 10th element in the array. And that's the first thing that should be showing on this page. Our last item on this page is going to be our first item index plus page size -1. And I forgot that these variables don't exist. Pagination states dot current page and page size. Okay, so the reason why we're doing this one is our current page is the first item plus 10 items if our size is 10. But we don't want to include that item. This is the index of the last item that we're going to include. We want to stop one before that. So if this is index 0, then it goes 0 through 9, which is 10 items. And so now we can go ahead and return. We're going to do product data dot slice. I think this is the function. Yeah, so it returns a copy of a section of an array, the start and the end index. This is exclusive of the elements at the end index. Okay, so I guess we don't need to do -1 here because it's not going to include whatever this last index is. So first item index, last item index, and it will slice out a copy of that section, not including this last item, and it'll return it. And so this will only perform this anytime our pagination state changes. And you'll notice I'm not putting in product data here, even though this is dependent on product data, like it's a variable that's in here. When our product data changes, we first want our pagination stuff to change before we do anything with the products. And so what I'm doing is when that changes, we're going to let this use effect run first, and it's going to send out the dispatcher. This dispatcher will update our pagination state object, which will then force this use memo to recalculate, and then we use the data. So this is intentional. But you will also notice that React seems to think that it's better than us and wants us to put product data in the dependency array. I know this is not what I want. This particular warning in React, you should not blindly listen to ever. It doesn't know a lot of cases what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's harmless. Sometimes it does actually change how your page behaves. So you should always think through this, test it out a little bit before you follow blindly. I can make this squiggly go away with this little exhaustive dependencies comment, which just disables it for this line. All right, so we have this use memo, and what this returns is a smaller array that just has the products we want. And so we can go ahead and replace our product data.map down here with our current page products.map. This will only show in the grid the things that are currently supposed to be there. So I'm going to console.log a bunch of different things here, just so that we can see what's happening. And every time the page re-renders, it's going to print these out. And let's test this out and see what happens. I'm gonna refresh the page. All right, so these are all of our defaults. And right now it's showing 10 elements, which is great. And let's scroll down. Our max page is going to be page 16. So things that look wrong already. These buttons should be page numbers. And I think I messed that up. Oops, I just didn't update these to-do values anywhere. So this previous page is the current page -1. Current page is, in fact, the current page. And then one next, the next page is going to be +1. So if we go back in here, this looks better. We're on page 1, page 2. This doesn't do anything because we didn't hook it up yet. And we're seeing 10 products per page. Go ahead. Do you have
Could
a
you
question?
zoom into the console just so maybe for the oh, it's not recorded anyway. I just want to see the console output really
Yeah,
quickly.
I didn't
Thank
realize it was
you.
that bad. Thank you for
It's
speaking up.
super tiny. Thank you.
All right, so we have 10 products per page. That looks okay. And it calculates 16 max elements. I'm also going to print out really quick product data length so that we can make sure our calculations are correct. Cool. So there's 156 items. We do in fact want 16 pages because the 16th page is going to be items 150 through 155, which is great. So this is showing 10 items. If we change this to be 50, all right, so this kind of works. It's showing 50 items, but you'll notice that when we print out our pagination state object, this is a string, and that's a little scary. This should not be a string, this should be a number. So when we're updating our page size, so I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and we'll do it again. If I update the page size to be 10, it's still a string. So this is our change page size action. And what it looks like it's doing is this page size is coming in as a string, and we're assigning it to our object. So if we go down and find where this action is being dispatched, which is on line 90, you'll notice this event.target.value, this is actually a string because the value of this option is a string. This is the bug that we were going to run into eventually. And we're passing it as a string, which is bad. So we're going to convert this to a number. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next week. All right, so this is our number. And we have 10 items per page. Looks like about 10. 20 items per page, our page gets longer. That's great. 50 items per page, our page gets longer. All right, so that looks good. And we have a fun 156 items, so we should have 4 pages. And all we have left to do is hook up our page buttons down here. So right now we have a bunch of different buttons and we need to give them all on-click handlers. So if it's previous, our on-click here, we're going to give it a function to execute, and this function is going to call pagination dispatcher. Let's go check what event we have. We have change page. And we did all of our error handling up here, so we probably don't need to do any down there. So pagination dispatcher type is going to be change page, and payload. What did we pass to the payload? New page. And if we're going to the previous page, we can get pagination state dot current page -1. All right, this looks good to me. This is going to execute. When this button is clicked, I'm going to go ahead and copy this out and put it on the other buttons. So one previous, this actually does the exact same thing. It just goes to current page -1. And one next. This is going to go to current page +1.
How did you do
And
that?
next. What do you mean, the copy and pasting?
Yeah, it's kind of basic question, but I'm like, wait, what did you do?
So we wrote an on-click handler for this very first button up here, which is just the function that it's going to run, and it calls a dispatcher. It's the same event every time, and we just pass in a different value to the payload. So I just copied the entire on-click which is just the property. And then for all the other buttons, pasted it in. And the only thing that updates is the new page that we're going to.
Got it. Thank you.
So we can just change. Here, these buttons do the exact same thing. In the case of Amazon, it's a little bit more tricky because they have buttons that go 2 pages in the future or go to the very last page. And so those on clicks would be a little bit different. But because we're doing a little simplified version for time, we can just change by 1. All right, moment of truth. Our on-click handlers are finished. Let's reload the page and see if this works. Products per page 10. And we have 16 pages. So we can go to the next page. So we're on page 2 now. I can't really tell from these 3 buttons which one is the current page. So I'm going to go really quick into this current page button and add another style property. Let's set the font size here to be 1.1 EMs. It's just 1 would be the standard font size. 1.1 is just slightly bigger. And let's change the text color to be blue, just to make it stand out. Great, and now it stands out a little better. All right, so we have 16 pages. We can go to page 2, page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Here we should only have 5 or 6 elements. We have 6, which is exactly what we think. And we cannot go to the next page because that doesn't exist. All right, this looks pretty good to me.